Hello, I'm Eric Micheels. I've been asked by Marianne and the folks at the Saskatchewan Cattlemen's Association to give a webinar, web talk on record keeping and management on Western Canadian farms and ranches. A lot of this work has been done in collaboration with colleagues here at the University of Saskatchewan, namely Kathy Larson, research associate in the Department of Agricultural and Resource Economics, and Nathan Erickson, a faculty member in the Western College of Veterinary Medicine. I also want to highlight some of the earlier work that I'll reference was done by a graduate student of mine, Manglai, who's now working with the Alberta Ministry of Agriculture. So to give a little bit of an overview of what I want to cover today is, first I want to set kind of the foundation of kind of where I'm coming from when I'm looking at these types of questions. Is first I want to understand, I want to think about this in terms of management. What is management and what are managers trying to accomplish? And that gets us to this idea of goal setting. Managers are trying to achieve some objective. Therefore, we assume that they've set some goal for themselves, and from there, they're going to direct resources and motivate employees towards the attainment of that goal. From there, I'll get into a survey of record-keeping practices that we conducted with Kathy and Nathan with respondents across Western Canada, and I'll highlight some of the descriptive statistics of who responded to this survey, and then we'll get into some of the key findings from those survey responses, and then I'll wrap up with some implications. What can we take away from this? What are the key lessons that we can take back to our own farm or to talk about in industry settings to further this discussion of record keeping and why it's important. So, like I said, I come from this from a viewpoint of management, of business management. So I want to set that framework, that foundation of what is management. And if we look at introductory management texts or even higher level management books, from foundational thinkers in management to farm management, we come back to these four guiding principles. So management really boils down to planning, organizing, leading, and controlling. And what those principles look at is kind of four different questions of what is the firm going to do, which addresses the planning question. Does the firm have the resources to accomplish that plan? Do they need to acquire more resources? Do they need to partner? Do they need to build human capital? What have you. In the leading aspect, it looks at how managers are able to motivate team members towards the achievement of those goals. And finally, in controlling, we're looking at the feedback loops of are we close to achieving that goal? If we're not, do we need to redirect resources? Do we need to redirect, spend more time in trying to achieve that goal? Do we change what our goal is? Do we modify expectations? If we maybe overshot our goal and we're not going to achieve that, do we maybe scale back so we can have some success in achieving what we set out to? So that's kind of the foundation in management of where I'm coming from. It was coming when even in a farm management setting, I still think these four fundamental questions are important. Of what is the plan? What is that farm or ranch trying to accomplish? Are the resources there to achieve those goals? And how do they manage those feedback loops of are we there yet, and what do we need to do to achieve success? This brings us to the idea of what is the goal? What is the goal of a farm, or what is the goal of a ranch? And one way I think about this is, I follow a lot of sports, and I think of, in a baseball setting, with the baseball playoffs going on right now, it's kind of front of mind for me. I think of what is the goal for a baseball team? Well, the goal for a baseball team is to win games, right? And we can think of, well, how does a baseball team win games? Well, they have to score runs. You have to get base runners on base, and you have to get them from first base to second base, third base, and on to home. And you also have to limit your opponent's ability to score runs. So there's two things that have to happen in order to win a baseball game. You have to score a run, and you have to limit your opponent's ability to score a run. On a ranch, we can think of that, the goal might be to profitably produce a calf. How do we, relating that back to this baseball analogy, that might, getting on base might be, looking at conception rates and weaning rates, and then the profitably producing a calf part might look at, how are we doing with the market prices? Are we managing the market risk adequately? Are we having healthy calves that we're able to actually sell when it comes that time? And our opponent, in some sense, is the expense side of the equation. How are we able to produce that calf at a cost basis that allows that rancher to make some profit, right? So managing the cost side is almost, limiting the opponent's ability to score runs. Again, bringing that back to that baseball analogy. So the goals, they're not perfectly parallel, but I think there are some similarities in terms of, managing the offensive side of ranching and managing the defensive side of ranching. How do we manage the productivity, and how do we manage the efficiency of the cost side? Goal setting has always been an important component of good farm and ranch extension programs. There's been a number of work that's been done in the States and across Canada on the importance of goal setting. Successful farm managers are those that set goals for the planning year, for short-term goals, medium-term goals, long-term goals, and then they continually adjust and they monitor their performance towards that goal, and they try and see where they are and how they can adjust if necessary. In achieving these goals, one of the key things that we've found is that record keeping is critical. That involves managing ranch data, figuring out where are ranches falling short of goals in order to achieve those medium and long-term goals, and that is done through managing data. Data is going to allow those farm managers, ranch managers to identify some gaps in their performance, reallocate resources in order to achieve those goals or narrow those gaps, and then determine whether that reallocation actually improved that performance or not, right? So record keeping allows that manager to determine whether they're on the right track, how close they are to achieving that goal, if they are on pace, ahead of pace, behind pace, and then they can adjust their metrics accordingly, right? They can say, well, if I'm behind schedule, what do we need to do? If I'm ahead of schedule or on schedule, there might be a different set of choices that rancher might make. One of the other things that we see in record keeping is that farmers tend to view farm work and paperwork as separate activities, when in some sense, from the management side of farm and ranch management, they're two sides of the same coin, right? So we have to, in order to be in order to ensure that we're achieving our goals and we're on pace to achieve our goals, we have to have that paperwork side of the farm work to actually see how resources are being allocated, if they're being allocated efficiently, if we are, you know, maintaining performance metrics that are on pace with our goals, on pace with some key peer groups, and so on, right? So record keeping and farm work are sometimes seen as you know, paperwork sometimes is seen as a necessary evil, but really we want to think of that as something that farmers want to invest time in, because that's where they might see some key opportunities for improvement. So that brings us to our survey. What are we seeing in Saskatchewan and Western Canada? This was a web-based survey. Recruitment was done via email and social media, so we don't have a random sample of ranchers across Western Canada. So we don't have, you know, we have a non-random sample, we have a biased sample in the sense of, you know, only people that are interested in record keeping, that are on social media, that respond to emails, might have felt the need to click on that link and fill out the survey. That being said, we had 62 responses, not a huge response rate considering the number of ranchers in Saskatchewan and Western Canada, but we felt, you know, from the responses we had, it gave us a good idea of what is going on. Not the best, again, not the best sample, but when we look at the results, when we say that this is a biased sample and is probably biased towards people who are interested in record keeping, the results that come out are even more important. So just some brief descriptives of the respondent. So if we look at responses, or the respondents by herd size and where they see their ranch in 5 years, we have, you know, like I said, 62 respondents, most of them under 250 head. Most of them plan to stay the same or expand in the next 5 years. So we have kind of our responses skew towards that, you know, most of them are under 250 head, most of them looking to get a little bigger in the next 5 years. When we look at, are they keeping records? You know, how are they keeping paper records? Paper only is still fairly common. About a quarter of our respondents indicated that they keep records using only paper. About also a quarter said electronic only, so just on a spreadsheet or a web-based or an app-based tool. And about half collect both. So maybe they have that pocket calving book in their pocket. They jot notes when they're working with their herd, and then they go back to the office and they input that data into a spreadsheet or an app-based tool. Number of systems that ranchers are using. By and large, most of the ranchers in our survey are maintaining data using an Excel spreadsheet, and we're seeing more and more uptake of a variety of programs. There's no clear market leader from our data on any of the third-party record-keeping systems. So most of these respondents are using Microsoft Excel or similar. And what we see when we dig into this, right? So we see that we have a number of respondents that indicated they do keep electronic record keeping. We have a number of respondents who are using spreadsheets and other tools to maintain records. And at the surface, that's great, right? We see we have a high adoption in computer-based record keeping systems. This jives with a lot of the earlier work that has been done in this area, that, you know, farmers are continuing to adopt computers in the business of farming. They're continuing to adopt spreadsheets and maintaining records, and that's great. But as we dig a little deeper, what we notice is that there's a distinct difference between the adoption of a tool and the utilization of that tool. And I'll show you what I mean by that here in a slide. So in this slide, what I apologize for the rows of data, but what we're looking at here is the questions in the columns are asking, does that ranch measure conception rate? Does that ranch measure calving distribution? And does that ranch measure pounds weaned per exposed female? So when we look at this, we see that that under 100 cow herd size, which we had 23 respondents who said they had a herd size under 100, 18 measure conception rate, 14 measure calving distribution, but only 6 take that all the way down to that, what are we actually getting paid for, is pounds weaned per exposed female, right? So and again, this is what I'm talking about, or this is what I mean when I say there's that distinct difference between adoption and utilization. Because while ranchers are paid on conception rate, what they actually deliver to the market is pounds weaned, right? Pounds weaned per exposed female is what is driving those checks if we follow that through. Conception rate is incredibly important. That's that first step in that process, but there's a lot of other steps that also happen in that process that are also important in that ultimate objective of profitably producing a calf. Going down those size categories, 101 to 250 animals. We had 19 respondents in that category. You see a similar drop-off from conception is measured, calving distribution measured, pounds weaned per exposed female, not so much. Pardon me. For the larger ranches, we see a number we see more consistency, if you will. Pardon me. We see more consistency across those categories. So measuring conception rate, measuring distribution, also measuring pounds weaned per exposed female. So there at that largest ranch category, maybe there's been, for those respondents, they've seen that as they've worked their way through record keeping, through their expansion, through their growth of their ranch, perhaps. They've seen the value in following that profit function path to see that it's also important to measure all of the factors that go into, getting to that pounds weaned, that how many pounds are you actually marketing, and then looking at that for that revenue, what's generating that revenue that helps pay the expenses, pay the family living wage, and so on. And again, just seeing that as a lot of the growth, or a lot of where we see the respondents here, is in that expansion phase. So those across all the categories where we see the majority of the responses in all of the record keeping categories is in that expand phase. So quickly looking at this, we can see that there's some definite areas for improvement and some definite areas to celebrate. Areas that we can improve on as an industry is really tying those production values, tying that production data back into that those financial statements. So tying the the calving percentage and the weaning weights and the pounds weaned per exposed female, tying that back into revenue per exposed female, cost per weaned calf, looking at this from a current ratio, from a liquidity standpoint, from a return on assets, critically important, not just from the production efficiency of these ranchers, but also the financial health. Where are we doing okay? Doing okay in measuring the calving distribution. About half of those, or about a third of our respondents said they measured a calving distribution. Also about a third measured the expense ratios. So we're doing okay there. Could always bump that up a little bit. Where we're seeing some real gains or real successes is measuring that pregnancy rate, that conception rate, in terms of there's a pretty high percentage of those respondents that measure that track that, take that in their, take that data in their calving book, upload it into their record keeping tool, and are able to manage that. So that's great. Some patterns that we see, again, a higher percentage of ranchers are tracking that production metrics compared to financial metrics. And that might go back to what I said earlier of sometimes we tend to invest time into areas that are fun, and it's maybe a little straighter line from tracking the production data, even though it's that paperwork side of farming. That's maybe a little bit closer to where that rancher's heart is, than bringing that back into the mess that we sometimes see in tracking financial records. I know that's often a headache for any business of that translating the production side into the financial side. But I think that's some areas that we can all work on drawing those clearer lines of how those gains in production translate into gains in financial health. What we're seeing somewhat, like I said in that earlier, in the difference between adoption and exploitation of a technology, when we see that the uptake of pounds weaned per breeding female, we saw that drop off in the recording and in the tracking of that data, but we saw pretty high rates of conception rate, right? But again, like I said, what ranchers are paid on is that pounds delivered, and that is a function of the conception rate and a number of other factors, right? So we have to, I think there's some areas where ranchers and industry associations and university faculty members can look at how do we, help in the sense of understanding or making it easier, simplifying the process of tracking a number of different components of that profit equation to give farmers a better dashboard of what's going on in their ranch, right? We wouldn't necessarily like if our combine or if our truck only had one gauge that would tell us one thing. So we want to maybe have multiple dashboards that's telling that ranch, here's where we are with calving percentage, here's where we are with average daily gain, here's where we are with weaning weight, and other important factors that rancher has decided are important for them in achieving their own goals. The reason that this is important, and the reason that we feel that it's important to continue to look at this question is, again, the work that was done earlier by my grad student Manglai showed that, for farmers that are able to maintain records and then benchmark against their own performance or against performance of a peer group or a peer association, what we found was, or what Manglai found was that those ranchers that did that had an 18-pound gain in pounds of calf weaned per exposed female. So that's a pretty good return on record keeping, especially across uh, 100 cow herd, or even as we get larger, 18 pounds times whatever herd size. That can be a significant amount of money for that return. So that's where it's important, I think, and that's where we see that the issue being that ranchers may be leaving some opportunities on the table for improving their own performance and improving their own financial health and financial well-being. The question then is, what do we benchmark against? We can always benchmark against our own performance. We can benchmark against where we were last year, maybe a 5-year average, an Olympic 5-year average, what have you. We can always benchmark against our own historical performance. What we're also seeing now is a number of peer groups that may be formed. We see this in cattle production around the world. Sometimes, in Australia, one of my colleagues has worked with and developed a beef profit partnerships program where producers would get together and say, well, we're going to try and solve this particular problem over a 90-day period, and they would work on solving that problem, and they would brainstorm together and try and come up with solutions to that problem. So you could work with peer groups. That might be one way to do that. And the other way would be, developing some industry average, industry benchmark where we have, what the average is, what the 75th percentile is on a number of different metrics. That way, and those could be stratified by size, it could be stratified by region, based on, different, market conditions as we move across Western Canada. But what that enables that producer to do is, they may be improving, when they compare themselves to their past performance, but what's also important is to see where is that particular ranch in relation to other similar ranches in their region. Are they above average? Are they in the top quartile in certain categories and below in others? And what that allows them to do, that rancher to do, is it sends off a warning light that says, hey, there's an opportunity for me to get this metric closer to that industry average in this category, and in doing so, they can see how that's going to improve performance through increasing the pounds of calves that are marketed. Maybe it's increasing that calving percentage. Maybe it's shortening that breeding window. What have you? Wherever that gap is, that rancher is able to identify that gap in performance and then reallocate resources to narrow that gap. What we're, in terms of benchmarking, again, this is that same data, that 62 respondent survey data. What we're seeing here in benchmarking, again, on the left here, we have the conception and open rate and calving distribution and other variables, that percentage or the number of respondents that have indicated they measure that. And on the right, we see how many of those compare that to a goal. And across all of these categories, save one, except for pounds produced per acre, there were 3 ranchers who measure pounds produced per acre and they compare it to their goal. But across every other category, conception and open rate, 43 respondents measure that, only 25 compare it to a goal. For calving distribution, 31 respondents measure that, only 19 compare it to a goal. So that's another area where we can improve that next step in record keeping. So we're keeping this record, but what are we doing with it, right? So we've adopted record keeping, but can we fully utilize it in order to improve that performance? So some successes that we see is in comparing to past performance. So while setting a goal and comparing to a goal, there could be areas for improvement. Farmers in the sample have been pretty good in comparing to past performance. Those drop-offs weren't as significant when we go from 43 respondents said they track conception or open rate. 40 of those respondents compare that to past performance. Right, in calving distribution, the drop-off again was only 3. 31 said they track that. 28 said they compare it to past performance. So that's been one success. So that self-benchmarking has been picking up, or it may be coming through in some of that. The industry talks and whatnot, the importance of self-benchmarking. The next step is what is the goal that ranch can set. So we want to compare to past performance, but we also want to set a goal in the future to where are we trying to go. So what I want to leave you with is some things that producers can do to continue on in this work. So first thing, identify the key success factors in your ranch. What are the things that you can do to ensure that your ranch is profitable, is financially healthy, financially sustainable into the next year and wherever your medium and long-term goals are. Within those key success factors, I'd also say establish a goal for each metric. So we're going to track this data point. Where would we like that data point to be? And this gets back to some of the work that Danny Kleinfelter and others have done at Texas A&M, where you talked about that 5% rule. So we don't have to have huge gains across one broad metric, right? But if we can get a little bit better across all of these metrics, if we can get 5% better across that, these gains are multiplicative and cumulative, right? So we can just take, identifying that metric, tracking where that ranch is, and then setting a goal of where could that ranch get to in the next 1 or 2 or 3 years. The other thing, determine a relevant benchmark. Maybe the relevant benchmark is your own performance. Maybe there's a peer group that you're working with. Maybe there's an industry association that you can benchmark your performance to. But it's important to compare to something, right? We want to be able to compare to our own performance or a peer group or an industry group. And the last thing is to use these benchmarks to identify gaps in your own performance relative to the industry. Are there areas that are screaming for you to reallocate resources to narrow those productivity gaps? And in some sense, we're looking for what is the greatest return on your resources. If narrowing a particular gap is going to lead to a greater return, maybe that's where we want to focus our time and energy. What can industry do? From this survey, it seems like there's been a lot of success in the uptake and the utilization of the calving book. Maybe we can build on that. How can we continue to build on that success? Can we think of other metrics that are equally as important or that are that next in line, or what is the next issue that ranchers can focus some time on, build on that success of the calving book, and now see where else we can take what we've learned as an industry in achieving that success and move on to something else. One area that I think is important is to renew or reinvest in industry benchmarks. I know that was one area where Kathy Larson worked on previously with the Western Beef Development Center. As that got folded into the university, we kind of lost that benchmarking set of what's going on. And I think that's an area where industry could really see some returns on developing that new benchmark. And the last thing is continue to fund research on the management side of ranching. I think there's some real gains to be had in this portfolio approach of the productivity gains and also the management gains. What can we learn and how can we improve the industry as a whole by learning more on that management side and managing the finances and the economics of that ranch business. So that's all I had. If you have any questions, my contact information is here. I'm happy to talk to you by phone, over email, or you can find me on Twitter. Thanks again for the opportunity. I wish you well.